so delighted to welcome you here, the friends and family of Lindsay Stirring. We're all gathered together to celebrate the publication of her debut novel, her first novel. It's especially nice for us because Lindsay apparently grew up in the neighborhood and grew up in our bookstore, and that always makes us feel very special when someone who has been part of the store comes back under these wonderful circumstances. So please join me in welcoming Lindsay Stirring. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that introduction, and thank you all for coming. I'm totally overwhelmed because I used to sit in that bench back there and read Roald Dahl and get like 3/4 of the way through a book and then buy it. So I'm just going to read a few chapters from this book, which is about a town and one of its inhabitants. And then I'm going to read from something that I'm working on now. So. Pierre awoke to find he had lost his shadow. He is still sitting by the window, whistling hymns through 2 teeth. Beside him are a crinkled slip of paper, a flute, and a little tin cyclist painted red. He is naked. His wife Selma will not notice because she is blind. She is also mute, as she lost her voice cheering in the war. Even so, he can tell she is ashamed of him. He is always losing things. Selma is a novelist. She communicates through blinking. In November, she wrote a book about a town in which nobody died. Pierre disliked the story. He thought it absurd and told her so. Selma was furious. She spat on him. So Pierre apologized. "My words are like toothpaste, Selma, easy to omit but difficult to retract." "You are an idiot," Selma blinked. The railroad. Doris woke, as usual, beside a cargo train. Plumes of exhaust funneled from her husband's nose, only to vanish again between his lips. His snores rattled the mirror, loosened the dust. He throbbed and shuddered and trembled and heaved. Bleakly, Doris surveyed the commotion. "Wake up, Neville," she said. "I don't love you and I never have." The train clattered on. Doris decided, as she often did, that she would prefer a plant. Breakfast hour. Doris slipped down the corridor to the kitchen. Wisps of steam curled from the dishwasher, glazing the counter and frosting the sink. When Doris released the latch, the whole room swam with mist. Inside, clean mugs dripped like molars. Doris pulled tooth after tooth, wiping the glasses dry and dropping fistfuls of spoons into the utensil drawer. The spoons were pins. The drawer was Neville's pillowcase. Doris noticed that the train had paused. New silence wafted down the corridor, dissolved the kitchen steam. A sigh, the sound of trousers, Neville standing like a wrench in the corridor's throat. Doris smiled. Their marriage was a painting of which she was the gloss. Neville supplied the image, the reds and yellows, the crests of paint. The landscape was unremarkable and crudely drawn. One day, Doris thought, she would scrap the canvas, leave it naked on Main Street for the trolley wheels to shred. "Good morning, dear," she called. The mayor. For a long time, the mayor required all citizens to wear small wooden cages on their heads. The idea was to trap their thoughts before they wafted behind another's eyes, between another's ears. At first, the results were satisfactory. Then came the complications. The cages filled until the mayor could no longer distinguish one face from the next. Through the bars, he discerned only light. red for politicians, for philosophers bright blue, and for children the glint of candle flame. They were happily blind, watching their thoughts unfold before them as the objects of the world ticked on. Soon the mayor tired of the cages. Bureaucrats sawed off the bars until the ground was laced with splintered wood. "It's for the best," said the mayor through his black cigar. They watched the ash descend into his empty sleeves. They watched him with one face. The lexicon. Lately, Pierre has felt his brain expanding, growing lighter as if swollen with air. This morning, a thrust against the roof of his skull. Last night, a pressure in his jaw. Before long, he suspects, the whole machine will burst. Words will trickle through his ears, scamper back into the world. So as not to forget them, he has built a lexicon. Happiness, noun, selective sight. To age, verb, to bury music. Icicle, noun, a brief spear. The mortician. Dmitri lived on the edge of town in a cottage with ivory doors. Inside, the air was cold enough to snap. Heat was impracticable. Dmitri's guests required temperatures of at least 15 below. Upstairs was a room with 20 beds, the mattresses stuffed with ice. All day, Dmitri watched his sleepers, admiring their faces, their pale blue hands. He'd seen most of them before, bustling through town on important errands. Their lives were a sequence of errands, he knew, each one terribly important. Dmitri's guests seemed like ordinary citizens. They, too, had names. They had lips and noses and limbs. They were awfully polite. The only thing different about Dmitri's guests was their eyes. They were locked. Dmitri's task was to unlock the eyes. Afterward, he sifted through memories and other fossils to recover the sleeper's last thought. Some of the thoughts were pictures, some were words. A few were unspeakably sad. Dmitri stored the thoughts in bronze vials, which he hung from the ceiling. The vials were impervious to cold. Dmitri kept his guests for as long as he could. He winced to think of what came next. The graveyards, the disrupted flesh. Stone flowers with roots of bone. In dreams he slept beside them, lungs swollen with earth, sealed beneath the world and its rushing air. He would wake alone. In silence he would sit among the vials, bleaching the room with his breath. Now and then a thought would seep from one vial's rim, spilling down into his own unfastened eyes. The plague of dreams. Within a week, half the town had contracted the dream. It was highly contagious. Quarantine signs sprang up like dandelions. "Plague strike for a reason," said the mayor. He was miles away. His voice came from the mouth of an enormous gramophone. Flecks of ash descended from its lips. The bureaucrats held the gramophone as they would a vase of endangered birds. "That's right," a girl whispered. "It was aiming for you." One of the bureaucrats heard the girl. He had her deleted. In the dream, the sleeper encountered a wooden box. The box was full of nothing. The townspeople knew no words with which to express the dream, because words were nothing without things, which were nothing without words. The nothing hung between words and things like a mirror. So the last couple of chapters I'm going to read of this occurred to me a couple weeks after I visited a pet store with a friend, and inside we encountered a parrot, and we were told by the shopkeeper that the parrot wasn't too bright, but naturally we had to test his vocabulary, so we went over to his cage and we started talking to him, and all he did was press his face against the bars and repeat hello over and over. And just as we were about to leave, my friend stepped back and she said, "What is being?" And finally the parrot stopped speaking and he sneezed. The world. "Writing a book," said Pierre. "What's it like?" Selma shrugged. "A world assembles." "A world?" "A world, the world. What's the difference?" Pierre studied his wrists. "Where is it then?" "Where's what?" "The world." "Nowhere, of course." "Suppose I try it," said Pierre. "Try what?" Selma blinked. "Writing a book." "Suppose you do. What will happen?" "Words." Pierre was gazing at the wallpaper, whose daffodils had knelt beneath a sudden wind. "Words will happen," he said. "That's right, to you. Words will happen to me when you happen to them." So I'm just going to read one last piece, and it's from something that I'm working on right now as my senior thesis. So it's also about a sort of town and what happens in it. On an autumn morning in year 20, the people of Luce awoke to find memory reversed. Recollections of the day to come wafted into their conversation, their morning jokes. History loomed, swept of images. The future, meanwhile, fell into view. Few sensed the difference at first, except to notice, privately and with vague discomfort, that thought had taken on a new flavor. Until they glanced at the date on the morning paper, most mistook tomorrow for the day before, the latter seeming, respectively, ever more remote. As noon approached, the change intensified. Regret calcified into apprehension, disappointment into dread. Quarrels erupted over wrongs not yet inflicted. Familiar objects stupefied their beholders, worn as they were with evidence of prior use. For over a week, elation struck. Economists declared an end to uncertainty. Strangers, yet to marry, sought each other out. The young looked with awe at their skin, familiar now with the striations still to come. For the dying, the world was fresh, stripped clean of losses and spoiled hopes, innocent of irreparable wrongs. As if in retrospect, future events assumed a new logic. Generals shifted their sights from weapon construction to the etiology of impending wars. Recessions were newly intelligible, droughts circumvented. Accident was transmuted into law. If the great forgetting, as it came to be known, had ended more quickly, before concluding as it did at last in year 21, the people of Luce might have remembered it more fondly. That initial week might have seemed a consolation, a proof that their ambitions weren't entirely vain, that there was something after all for which to wait. They might have longed to reinstate the forgetting, done their best to blot out the past that reappeared one November morning as if it had never gone. They might have missed what they'd seen of the future, had it not been for a strange affliction that set in shortly after that first ecstatic week. For months no one spoke of it, and when they did, it was reluctantly, with something like shame. The first signs emerged a few weeks after memory's reversal, when teachers of grammar found themselves confronting widespread confusion about the subjunctive case. "What do you mean, were to be?" the children asked. "What will be is there already." Questions multiplied about another tense altogether, the future perfect. "What will have been," they continued. "Where is it? Where do things go once they happen?" The same questions haunted vocabulary lessons, where the word nostalgia elicited only more confusion. With nothing to remember, there should have been nothing to miss. And yet nostalgia persisted, more insidious now, less forgiving in its machinations, as, like wind changing direction, it aimed itself at the landscape to come. Gradually, the people of Luce understood the loss implicit in the children's frowns. No longer was the future, once elapsed, accessible to thought. Instead, the now erased it. Tomorrow, for all its promises of fact, remained just north of the given hour, never arriving.
Whoa.
Thank you all so much. If any of you have questions, I'd be happy to try to answer them. Yeah.
Was this the first time you had read any of it aloud, and if so, were you surprised by the reaction?
Well, I actually read it. I've only once before read it aloud, and it was in Amherst. Yeah, nobody laughed at all. Yeah. Someone afterward equated it with the mortician chapter, the whole reading. Okay. Yes.
I think you're a surrealist painter with words.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Seriously, you're major. You're amazing.
Thank you so much.
I mean it. You're brilliant.
All right.
Well,
Second that.
well, what?
So, Lindsay, what makes you laugh?
Well, clearly parrots. I mean, I don't know if I should answer that in public. No. Yeah. Some of these chapters really did occur to me after bizarre events like the one I described. And I mean, from the little I know about surrealism, I know that kind of free associative logic was probably at work to some extent, but.
And new work, what's inspiring that?
Take one question.
Okay.
The new book that you started reading from, what's the inspiration for that?
I think there were a lot of questions that writing this book raised for me that I guess I didn't really explore, and so it's really those questions. It's the new book is probably going to be longer, and it'll be more like a genealogy of this fictional place, and so in the Town of Shadows, all the characters have names, but there's no name for the town. And in the new book, the town has a name, and there are no individual names.
Whoa.
Lindsay,
Okay.
thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all.